When a dashing officer and a beautiful deputy jailer join forces, it seems like a match made in heaven.
I think they had an attraction because they both worked in law enforcement.
He was sort of this charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard.
But just when their lives seem destined for greatness, an unexpected disappearance upends their world.
There was a buzz in the city about a missing police officer.
We knew something bad probably gonna come after this.
As investigators search for answers, they'll soon find themselves plunged into uncharted waters. A place where secrets bubble just under the surface and deadly sins flow like blood.
There are drugs, there's a lot of criminal activity. Officers are often the targets of bad people.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well.
He's coming towards her, and that's when it happens.
It just was a bad situation. Never should have happened.
They got away with a capital murder.
Monday, September 4th, 2006. It's Labor Day weekend in Memphis, Tennessee. All across town, families are enjoying end-of-summer barbecues. But at the home of Ethel Hayes, the absence of her beloved son, Tony, a 9-year veteran of the Memphis Police Department, is putting a damper on the festivities.
He hasn't contacted any of you and said he wasn't coming?
I hadn't talked to him today, but last I heard, he said he was coming.
She supposed been picking up his son and bring him to the barbecue too. And he never did show up.
That kind of alarmed the family that he didn't pick his son up because there are certain things Tony would not do, and not picking up his son was one of them. He loved his son very much.
Over the next few hours, Tony's family continues to try to track him down.
Did he answer?
Every time I call, I just get the voicemail. I'm telling you, something's not right. It's not right.
My grandma was start calling everybody that she knew that knew Tony and see could they get in touch with him.
No one knew where Tony was.
But the disappearance of Officer Tony Hayes is a mystery that's only beginning to unfold. One that'll have many wondering just who in this story was on the wrong side of the law.
We was just saying, why? How could something happen like this? Everything was just crazy.
Tony Hayes was born in 1969 in the new Chicago neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee.
It was a low-income neighborhood, but there was a sense of pride in the community. Even though it was low income, my parents instilled values in us.
Values that the whole Hayes family took to heart.
The Hayes family was a very loving, caring family. Mother Hayes, she did not play with her children. They knew that she was their friend, but she was also the law in that household.
In this strict yet caring environment, Tony grew up to be a model citizen.
He was just a very disciplined person.
After high school, Tony went off to the Marine Corps. He served his country during the Persian Gulf War, and I think maybe saw himself becoming a law enforcement officer.
A dream that came true after Tony left the Marine Corps and returned home to Memphis.
When Tony became a Memphis police officer, that was a sense of pride and accomplishment for him.
For the next 9 years, Tony worked some of the most dangerous beats in the city.
Tony was an undercover cop. He do his job to the fullest, and he was a hard worker.
He ultimately arose to the rank of sergeant and was proud of that accomplishment, as was his family.
But Tony's success in life extended well beyond the workplace.
No, guys, I'm gonna go there.
He also fared well with the ladies.
Good evening, ladies. How you doing?
He was about 6'1" in height and very athletically built. And it was all muscle, and it wasn't no fat. He wore nice clothes, and he was a car enthusiast. So, you know, he loved cars. He always had a nice car and kept himself up. So like I said, the ladies probably found Tony very attractive.
Like his prized cars, Tony had a soft spot for beautiful women. And over the next few years, he married twice.
He met his first wife after he got out of the military. She was drop-dead gorgeous, as was his second wife.
Though both marriages ended in divorce, there was a silver lining.
Even though the breakups were hard, Tony's second wife blessed him with a son,
And that son became the light of his life.
He was very crazy about his son. It looked like he was Tony's mini-me.
He was an excellent father, spent a lot of time with his son, and really provided a great role model for that young man.
Though Tony was a loving father, he longed to have a woman in his life to help him raise young Devin. And in the spring of 2005, Tony met the drop-dead gorgeous 36-year-old Monique Johnson.
Tony Hayes met Monique Johnson while he was moonlighting as a security guard at the apartment complex where she lived.
I'm Tony.
It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, beautiful.
Monique would be what a lot of people considered very attractive. She described herself as light-skinned with long hair and having it going on.
Tony was really taken by her appearance.
For Monique, the attraction was mutual.
Dinner sometime?
Yeah, sure.
He was sort of this kind of charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard for Tony. He would take her out to eat. They were spending every day together. He would send her flowers.
But as the couple ignited their romance, it didn't take Tony long to realize that Monique may be more than just a passing fling.
There's no doubt Monique and Tony had a lot in common.
Monique Johnson was a native of the region, had a hard upbringing, but managed to bring herself up by her own bootstraps. She was married and divorced, had 2 children.
Like Tony, Monique also shared a passion for law enforcement.
Monique worked as a deputy jailer for the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
Having so much in common only heightened the couple's attraction to one another. But it was in the bedroom where the sparks really flew.
It became incredibly passionate, and it moved very quickly.
It was passionate, hot, and it seemed perfect. They were planning a future.
Though both Tony and Monique had tried and failed at marriage before, by the spring of 2006, the couple was talking engagement rings and wedding vows.
Tony was telling Monique, hey, one day we're gonna get married and have this family.
They both believed that a part that had been missing in their lives had been completed.
In light of Tony's newfound happiness, his disappearance on September 4th, 2006 is even more concerning.
We want to know, why would he do this? Why he want to answer his phone, and why he want to call nobody and tell somebody where he at?
The following morning, Tony is absent from roll call at the Memphis Police's Union Station precinct, which makes his fellow officers extremely worried.
Has anybody seen Hayes?
By all accounts, Tony was a model officer, and when he failed to show up for his shift, alarm bells started to go off.
The police, to say the least, were taking Tony's disappearance very seriously.
But just what had happened to Officer Tony Hayes?
Try calling him again?
His colleagues and friends are determined to find out.
The Memphis Police Department was going to be very aggressive about it. We knew that it was going to be passionate for them as it was for us to seek what they thought was justice.
After a blissful year together, Deputy Jailer Monique Johnson and Police Officer Tony Hayes were already talking marriage.
Tony and Monique fell in love hard, and it was fast.
They appeared to be happy and a good match.
But now, on September 6th, 2006, Tony's been missing for more than 24 hours, and his colleagues at the Memphis Police Department are growing increasingly concerned.
The last time that his family had seen or spoken to Tony was on the afternoon of September the 3rd. He was supposed to come to a family picnic the next day, but he failed to show up.
Tony goes missing, and it does become a big deal quickly. Because of Tony's occupation, both as a police officer and the fact that he worked as security at the apartment complex, gave him exposure to a lot of volatile situations.
While Tony was missing, there were several scenarios discussed within the police department amongst his friends and family. Did someone put out a hit on Tony? Was it the result of some sort of investigation in which he was involved?
They were looking. The police were actively looking everywhere they could.
While detectives comb through Tony's arrest records in search of a lead, a team of officers execute a search of his home.
There's no evidence of foul play, But a search of his residence revealed his Lexus is missing from the garage.
Car's gone.
Police were looking for those plates in that car.
By that afternoon, Tony's disappearance is the talk of the town.
Missing persons reports typically get some media coverage depending on who is missing. But when a Memphis police officer, a person in charge of protecting the community, is now missing, it certainly got our attention and was quickly on the TV news, radio news, even in the newspaper.
Though Tony Hayes' loved ones are grateful for the attention, their fears continue to mount.
I tried to be optimistic, but after a day had went by and he hadn't called his mom, he hadn't checked in on his son, it became very evident that something was wrong.
No one seems more concerned about Tony's disappearance than his beloved girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
She was expressing her worry over Tony because she had called him several times and kept getting his machine. And so she said it was very unusual because if he wouldn't call back, he would text back.
But Monique's other pressing concern is the well-being of Tony's 11-year-old son, Devin.
She decided she'd check on the son. And so she got a French fries and the hamburger and took that over.
How are you doing, kiddo?
I just wish I knew where my dad was.
Me too.
Later that evening, investigators get their first chance to speak to Monique Johnson at her home in a brand new suburban development.
When was the last time that you actually saw Tony?
Well, that would have had to have been the morning of Monday, September 4th.
She said that they went to the casinos and they stayed down there that night and that they came back and that he was going to pick up the son.
Was that the last time you heard from him?
Yes, and I went to the movies that night. When I got out, I heard that Tony had been missing.
Have you ever had any kind of problems in your relationship
No,
with Tony?
not at all. I love him so much. And I really just hope that you guys find him.
As a deputy jailer in Shelby County, Monique knew the dangers of law enforcement. She was extremely worried about Tony's whereabouts, and she was hoping that everything would turn out okay.
They checked her story out, and she had gone out to see a movie the night of Tony's disappearance.
But before detectives leave that evening, they ask Monique one last question.
One angle we're still pursuing is that his disappearance was work-related. So had he mentioned anything to you about work lately? Any issues?
Actually, there is.
Look, I ain't got time to be standing out here all night. Come on, open the door, stop playing.
She remembers something happening at the apartments where he had to pull a gun on a guy and the guy threatened him.
Yo, I need you to calm down now. Leave the premises now, sir. I'll see you later, partner. I'll be back.
This was the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted. So there was some fear that something could have happened there.
He was essentially off duty and alone and far more susceptible.
While detectives dispatch a team to investigate Monique's allegations, they return to their station for a scheduled meeting with some of Tony's closest colleagues.
They thought Tony's co-workers might know something about problems with former perps.
But what Tony's co-workers are about to reveal will stun detectives, leaving them to wonder if this top cop had actually been living a double life.
This isn't the kind of thing you'd expect to turn up, and detectives realized it was going to be a game changer.
Memphis police officer Tony Hayes seemed to have it all. A great career, a beautiful son, and a stunning girlfriend who set his heart aflame. But now Tony has disappeared without a trace, and detectives fear that he may have been targeted by a violent criminal with an axe to grind.
Police put themselves out there every day. Just going to work, it's possible they could be shot just for wearing the uniform.
Monique told police that Tony had recently been threatened by a guy at the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted.
But while searching for the mystery man who threatened Tony, detectives are also questioning Tony's colleagues at the Memphis Police Department.
The priority is to find Tony.
Yes.
And so I'm just here to ask you if you have anything you can share with us.
Anything could have happened to him, but his personal life is pretty complicated too.
What do you mean exactly?
That's when Tony's colleagues informed detectives that technically, Tony never officially divorced his ex-wife, Kayla Hayes.
During the investigation, Memphis PD discovers that Tony Hayes is married.
Tony's colleagues don't know, however, if Tony's wife knew about Monique or if Monique knew about Tony's wife.
At this point, detectives can't help but wonder, could Tony have been murdered by his own wife?
Thank you very much.
To answer that question, they decide to speak to Tony's wife, Kayla Hayes.
They learn that she is actually living and working in Las Vegas.
After contacting their counterparts at the Vegas PD, a local detective heads to Kayla's home.
Ms. Hayes, I'm with the Las Vegas Police Department. Do you mind if I come in and speak with you for a moment?
Is this about Tony?
Yes, it is.
Come on.
Kayla explains that a couple of days earlier, she had received word from Tony's family that he had gone missing.
When was the last time you spoke with Tony?
Honestly, it had been a while.
Kayla explains that they had been separated for about 1 year and 4 months. In fact, they had only been married for about 3 months before that.
We lived together in Memphis, but it was clear really early on that it just wasn't going to work out.
She said they wanted different things out of life, but apparently, Tony had a wandering eye.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well. He was what could be called a player.
Were you aware he was seeing a woman named Monique Johnson?
Oh yeah, unfortunately, we'd spoke.
His wife was calling to talk to Tony. And since Monique had Tony's phone, she answered. And the wife's going, "Who are you?" And Monique's going, "Who are you?" She goes, "Well, I'm his wife." Well, that didn't sit well with Monique.
And how did you feel that he was seeing another woman?
Look, I have my life and he has his.
Kayla was adamant that she had nothing to do with Tony's disappearance and that she was in Las Vegas September 4th. And when they checked the car and flight records, her story checked out.
While Tony's wife, Kayla, seems innocent of any wrongdoing, her statement prompts detectives in Memphis to pay another visit to Tony's girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
They go back to Monique and they confront her about what they know at this point.
Monique doesn't deny any of it. She admits that she was furious when she found out that Tony was married.
When were you going to tell me?
Babe, listen to me.
No. When were you going to tell me? When were you going to tell me that you were married?
I'm sorry, I just didn't know how to tell you. It was over months before we met each other. Monique, it's just me and you.
According to Monique, Tony reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. Eventually, they reconciled, and since then, they hadn't had any other problems.
Detectives aren't sure what to make of Monique's story, but with no sign of Tony and no evidence of foul play, there's little else they can do.
They had a feeling Monique wasn't telling the whole story, but a feeling isn't grounds for an arrest.
While Monique remains adamant she has no idea what happened to Tony, investigators wonder if Tony's phone records might shed more light on his disappearance.
They pulled Tony's phone records and see he had gotten a text from a woman at 7 a.m. But this woman wasn't Monique Johnson.
Her name was Kim Chapman. So of course, the next question from police is, who is this woman? What's her connection to Tony Hayes?
That afternoon, detectives ask Kim Chapman to come to the station for an interview. When Kim arrives, she makes quite the impression.
She was very different from Monique. She was a professional woman. She was about 6 feet tall. She had a large frame.
Detectives want to know what her connection is to Tony Hayes. And she says they've been casually dating for the past few months.
The reason we called you in is because we've obtained phone records indicating you had contact with Tony on the date of his disappearance.
Yeah, I texted him because I wanted to go jogging. I was seeing if he was able to come with me.
According to Kim, she got a call back from Tony's phone a short time later. But the voice on the other end of the line wasn't what she expected.
What Kim reveals next will dramatically alter the course of the investigation into Tony Hayes' disappearance and illuminate just how sordid and potentially deadly his love life had become.
I think he was a fun-loving guy, a good guy, but someone who played the field too much, and he just played with the wrong one.
For more than 48 hours, police in Memphis, Tennessee have been desperately trying to track down their missing colleague, Tony Hayes. The search for Tony has led investigators to a trio of beautiful young women, including Tony's wife, Kayla, his girlfriend, Monique Johnson, and the young woman now seated across from them at the station, Kim Chapman.
Kim Chapman admitted she and Tony were seeing each other and that she had texted him to go jogging the day he went missing. Investigators want to know if she had anything to do with his disappearance.
The last contact that you had with Tony was that text?
Well, I got a call back from someone else. I don't know who she is. Her name was Monique.
Hello?
Kim says she answered the phone expecting it to be Tony, but instead, somebody else was on the line, Monique Johnson.
Monique says, "What are you doing getting together with Tony?" And Kim's going, "Whoa, who are you and why do you care?"
And Monique said, "Well, who are you? I'm Tony's girlfriend. Well, he's been with me all weekend. Did you know about me?"
I don't care. No.
Kim claims the call dropped moments later, but not before she heard another voice in the background.
Tony.
Kim says she heard Tony's voice, and he was angry. And Monique was just giving it right back to him.
Monique Johnson had previously told police she had no reason to harm Tony. But if Kim Chapman's statement is true, detectives have proof that Monique and Tony got in a heated argument just hours before he disappeared.
The detectives don't think this is a coincidence.
That evening, investigators bring Monique in for questioning a third time and confront her about Kim's allegations.
We're going to give you one last chance to be honest with us and tell us what really happened to Tony Hayes.
I don't know.
Ms. Johnson, we talked to Kim Chapman. She told us that the day that Tony disappeared, you and him got into a scuffle.
Monique knows she's in a really bad place. So she says, okay, I'll talk.
Monique says that after she confronted Tony about his marriage to Kayla Hayes, he assured her there were no other women in his life. But over time, Monique began to doubt that he was truly faithful to her.
There were some flags. It would be unexplained absences or a refusal to really acknowledge where he'd been or what he'd been doing, or phone calls that he couldn't take. That's when tempers began to flare on both sides. He became very adamant about it not happening, or angry that she didn't trust him, and she was very angry that he wasn't trustworthy.
Monique claims that the situation came to a head the morning Tony disappeared.
The phone is going off, and she is compelled by the mistrust to look at the phone. And as a text.
Monique says the text was from one Kim Chapman.
Monique said in her statement that she was tired of being played around with.
She couldn't take it no more. She was just real jealous.
She grabbed the phone and left Tony's house while he was in the shower and jumped in her car and began to call the female.
According to Monique, she was driving to her house while on the phone with Kim, and by the time she pulled into her garage, she was boiling mad.
Who the hell is this?
While Monique is having this conversation with Kim, she spots Tony in her rearview mirror. He's caught up to her and wants his phone back.
Give me the damn phone. Give me the damn phone. I'm not playing with you, I'm serious. Give me the damn phone.
According to Monique, that's when Tony lunged at her.
She doesn't think he's coming for the phone. She thinks he's coming for her.
She described it, Tony hit her this time.
Get out the car.
Monique claims Tony's aggressive behavior was so terrifying that she feared for her life. That's when she reached for Tony's .40 caliber handgun, which he'd recently left under the passenger seat of her car.
And that's when it happens. She remembers the first shot, and that's about all she remembers.
That was so scary.
She asserts she acted in self-defense.
But if Monique had truly acted in self-defense, why is this the first time detectives are hearing this story?
From her perspective, because Tony was a police officer, she was afraid to go and confess to the same people that he worked with.
Monique says that in a panic, she turned to the only person she could think of, her son from a previous marriage, 16-year-old Donald Wallace.
Monique enlists the help of her son to remove Tony's body from the home, stuff him in the trunk of his own Lexus.
She made the son an accomplice to that act. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to your 16-year-old.
Detectives push Monique to tell them where Tony's body is. Monique does them one better. She takes them to the East Memphis apartment complex where she and her son Donald abandoned the vehicle.
They placed her in the squad car, and she took them directly to Tony's Lexus. And the body was in the trunk of that vehicle.
They backed it in so no one would notice the license plates.
That body had been sitting there for 4 days in this Memphis heat, and it was highly deformed. It was very hard to look at the body and even tell that it was Tony.
While CSIs process the car, detectives break the tragic news to Tony's family.
The police department came over there and told her that Monique Johnson has confessed to what happened.
Mother Hay was devastated. You know, so many hopes and dreams are lost when your child is gone and you know he's not gonna come back, and it's especially when it's due to violence. It just hurts more.
With Monique's confession, this deputy jailer now finds herself behind bars. Though she doesn't expect to be there for long.
She remained adamant that this was purely a case of self-defense and that she was the victim, not Tony.
But soon, an unlikely witness will step forward with new information. Information that threatens to turn the whole case upside down.
It's so inexcusable. It's not just the public doesn't understand, nobody understands.
On Friday, September 8th, 2006, in a Memphis police station, Monique Johnson confessed to shooting her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes, in a heated argument inside the garage of her home. A shooting Monique insists she only committed in self-defense.
She claims he lunged at her, struck her, attacked her, and she defended herself.
To find out if there's any truth to Monique's story, investigators bring in the young man who helped Monique move Tony's body, her 16-year-old son, Donald.
Your mother told us that you helped her carry Tony's body.
Donald, because of that, at this point, we're going to be charging you with accessory after the fact, okay? However, if you're willing to cooperate with us, there's a chance that we can get you off or help at least cut you a deal.
Okay.
Donald starts by telling detectives where to find the gun used in the shooting. It's in a garbage dumpster at an East Memphis apartment complex.
It was Tony's personal weapon, a .40 caliber pistol.
But that isn't all Donald tells police. He also makes a chilling revelation about the hours following Tony's death.
There was a time period after the shooting where Monique and her son left. They went to TGI Fridays, and then they went to a movie with some family members and saw snakes on a plane.
She went to dinner and a movie and enjoyed herself while her supposed boyfriend is starting to rot.
Was this the behavior simply of a woman in shock? Or was Monique actively trying to establish an alibi for herself in order to throw police off her trail? What Donald says next gives investigators a possible clue. In fact, he claims he was in the house at the time of the shooting.
Mom? He hears a series of gunshots go off in his own house, and he is instinctively terrified of what has happened to his mother.
Mom, what's going on? Mom, what did you do to him?
He eventually gets into the bedroom and discovers his mother, frantic by that point, and Tony lying on the floor bleeding.
The significance of that statement is that it directly contradicts Monique's version of events. She claims the shooting took place in the garage.
Police execute a search warrant of Monique's home, but at first there seems to be a problem with young Donald's story.
There was no blood up in that bathroom or bedroom, no bullets.
But as investigators take a closer look at the scene, they spot something unusual about the doors leading to the bathroom.
The paint didn't actually match up with the same paint that Monique had on her house. So you could tell that there had been one of the doors replaced in her home.
Detectives confront Monique about the new doors in her house, as well as the discrepancy between Donald's statement and her own version of what happened. Once again, Monique changes her story. She now claims that her fight began in the garage, but ended inside the house.
That whirlwind proceeds into the house. Tony's following her.
Monique says she fled to the safety of her master bedroom, but Tony forced his way inside.
He slams the door, locks it, and she feels a fist hit her in the back of the head.
Monique claims that before she knew what was happening, Tony was physically assaulting her. Thankfully, she managed to escape into the bathroom, but Tony didn't stop coming for her.
She's really getting scared, and she's telling him, Tony, just leave me alone, Tony, go. He's coming into the bathroom towards her. Finally, she finds her way back to her master closet, just behind the bathroom, and that's where her gun is.
She felt like she had nowhere to hide, nowhere to go, and nothing to do other than to defend herself.
After the first shot, she describes herself as going into a state of shock. She's unable to really accurately describe the physicality of what happened, the number of bullets that come out of the gun.
In the aftermath that followed, Monique says she noticed a bullet hole in one of the bathroom doors.
Monique went to one of the empty homes or model homes in the neighborhood and took one of the doors out of another model home and brought it and put it back on her bathroom door.
All the while, Monique's son was helping her do this.
Just grab his feet and help me.
But Monique insists that she only concocted her first story to try to minimize her son's role in the shooting.
She doesn't want Donald involved. She doesn't want him to go to jail. She wanted him out of it.
She was a mother trying to protect her son.
For Memphis authorities, Monique's shifting story casts serious doubt on her claims of self-defense.
Her story keeps changing. First, the argument and the shooting take place in the garage. Then, it had happened upstairs in her bedroom.
Later that day, the coroner's office releases Tony's autopsy report, and it casts even more doubt over Monique's statement.
He was shot 6 times. 4 bullets entered through his back, 1 through his chest, and 1 through his head at a downward angle. This woman, who's 5'6", was supposedly cowering from a 6'1" man.
4 shots in the back, 1 in the head, a downward projectile. So what does that look like? It looks like she's standing over him, executing him, and 1 in the chest.
There was no doubt in the state's mind that this was a premeditated murder.
Since the statement from Monique's son Donald helped investigators get closer to the truth, they grant him some leeway on the accessory charges.
Donald was placed on judicial diversion for his role, and he was really given a great opportunity to move forward with his life.
But prosecutors plan to pursue Monique with the full force of the law. On February 9, 2007, Monique Johnson is indicted on first-degree murder charges.
If she was convicted, she could spend the rest of her life in prison.
But was this truly the slam-dunk case that prosecutors believed? Or was Monique Johnson and her defense team saving the best version of her ever-changing story for last?
Everyone, again, they rushed to judgment. And all we could say was, you just wait until you hear the full story before you make your judgment on Monique Johnson.
In Memphis, Monique Johnson insists she acted in self-defense when she shot and killed her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes. But prosecutors believe Monique murdered Tony in cold blood.
The crux of this case essentially revolves around whether or not Monique Johnson was the victim, the perpetrator, or both of intimate partner violence.
Before the case even makes it to trial, sparring begins between the prosecution and defense. At a pretrial hearing, Monique's legal team tries to keep crime scene photos out of court.
The pictures that were taken of the car and the trunk when they opened it and found Tony Hayes there were particularly graphic. And it was the state's contention that it was essential that the jury see these pictures, because this is in fact what she did to him. This is what Monique did to Tony.
But according to the defense, these photos had nothing to do with how Tony was murdered and were just the byproduct of decomposition in the sweltering Memphis heat.
We were able to keep some of those pictures out because they were pretty nasty and pretty ugly.
The judge did not let any pictures of his body to go to the jury. I knew that was going to hurt us with the jury because pictures speak 1,000 words and jurors want to see them.
On February 12, 2008, Monique Johnson's murder trial gets underway inside a packed Shelby County courtroom.
It's a case that's captured the public's fascination, probably because it does involve an attractive couple, one of whom's a police officer and the other's a correctional officer. You'd expect them to behave better.
In their opening statements, prosecutors portray Monique as a scorned, jealous lover who was out for revenge against her two-timing boyfriend.
Tony did have a reputation for playing around with women, and I don't think she wanted to be played with. She was angry.
So angry, in fact, that when Monique discovered Kim Chapman's text message on September 4th, 2006, the beautiful femme fatale concocted a plan to exact the ultimate revenge against her unfaithful boyfriend.
The state feels like Monique's state of mind was. She was, in essence, creating a trap. Monique wanted to trap him back in her bedroom.
Tony was shot 6 times, including a round that was fired in a downward trajectory. As far as the state was concerned, that seriously undermined Monique's story of self-defense.
Then there's Monique's evasive actions in the aftermath of the shooting. She lied to police, she hid his body and the weapon used to kill him, and cleaned up the scene.
But Monique's defense team asserts their client did have a legitimate reason to be scared of Tony Hayes that morning.
The defense team essentially stated that she was a battered woman and was acting in self-defense.
She said maybe 3 months into the relationship was the first episode of abuse. A few months later, there's this next episode. And eventually it was more frequent.
To bolster their claims of abuse, the defense calls several members of Monique's family to the witness stand.
They testified that they had seen marks on her neck and on her thighs.
But for prosecutors, as well as Tony's friends and family, the abuse allegations don't hold much water.
The reason Monique said that she pulled the trigger, that my uncle was abusive, but no police report on domestic violence or nothing like that ever happened.
I knew Tony for 32 years. I never knew him to ever hit a lady. I think Monique was just trying to come up with a defense.
In fact, prosecutors say if anyone in the relationship had a history of violence, it was Monique. As proof, they point to a report Tony filed against her in May of 2006.
In a fit of jealous rage, Monique cut Tony's clothes, carved obscenities into his headboard and into the side of his car, cut the electrical cords on his appliances, and poured baby oil into his shoes.
Tony did call police, though he didn't go forward with charges.
So it was clear in the state's mind that he was the victim. He was the one who was being psychologically abused.
So was Monique Johnson a violent and vindictive lover like prosecutors claim? Or is she, as the defense suggests, a victim of abuse? On Valentine's Day 2008, jurors got to hear Monique's side of the story firsthand.
I was very concerned that Monique probably should not take the stand. But in trying to establish self-defense, the jury would need to hear from Monique. They would need to understand her mental state.
She would start crying when presented with certain things, like her prior vandalism. She would go, well, you know, he just did so much to make me so angry, and I felt like I could never be free of him. And it was all her being oppressed.
I would ask her, did you love Tony? And she would start bawling and say, yeah, I loved him. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want him to die. It became pretty clear that she wasn't just this cold, calculating killer, but was truly someone who was in love with Tony and didn't know how to get away from it.
But who would the jury find more credible? Monique and her emotional testimony, or the state and its physical and circumstantial evidence? On February 15th, they hand down their verdict.
She wasn't found guilty of first-degree murder, but a lesser charge of reckless homicide, which carries a 2 to 4 year sentence.
For prosecutors and Tony's family, it's a crushing defeat.
It was just like someone had knocked all the air out of me. Really? Did we hear this right? This can't be true.
The real victim of domestic violence in this situation was Tony Hayes. He lost his life. He was shot 6 times, and she got away with murder.
For Monique Johnson, the verdict is better than anything she could have imagined.
That was a huge win for us. Huge. Probably one of the best verdicts I've received in my lifetime as a trial attorney.
Ultimately, Monique was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After taking into account the 2 years she had already served, she only has to serve another 2.
And though Monique Johnson is now a free woman, her verdict is still a deeply divisive subject in Memphis. In a story rife with infidelity and mistrust, at least both sides can still agree on one thing.
There are no winners here. This was just ugly. These two never should have been together.
Appetite, Dominic. Bon appetite, Dell had replied, waving a hand as if he owned the very air. It was a world of viva la vida loca, of black cats and voodoo dolls, mostly in the form of the superstitions that follow the suddenly wealthy. But beneath the surface, the premonitions were starting to stir. He remembered the chaos of family life and luxury. Cassandra, always the voice of reason, complaining about Damien's latest antics. Ralph, you've got to have a word with Damien. People are complaining, she had said, her face flushed with embarrassment. Oh, no, what's he done now? Dell had asked, secretly proud of his son's spirit. He's just weed in the swimming pool. Dell had laughed it off then. All little boys do enjoy a splash in the swimming pool, don't they? Yes, Dell, Cassandra had replied through gritted teeth, but not from the top of the 4-meter diving board. He was a little git, as Rodney often said, but he was a trotter, and for a while, it felt like the trotter name was written in the stars. They talked about Uncle Albert, who was enjoying his retirement on the coast, living in sin with Elsie Partridge. Old Uncle Albert, he'd love it here. Rodney had mused during a quiet evening by the ocean, right next door to the sea, just like the war. Yeah, Dell had agreed. At least we haven't got to sit through the Battle of the Baltic every night. During the war. But then the tide turned, not with a roar, but with the quiet tap of a keyboard. The stock market crash was like a wave that swept away their sand castles. It turned out that negotiations between the Central American countries had collapsed. Dell explained to Justin, the pain evident in his eyes. Yeah, it was wiped out. Every penny. Nicked the lot. The transition from Mr. Potter to that bloke who owes us for the minibar had been instantaneous. They had paid for the hotel on a credit card, a card that was withdrawn before the ink on the receipt was dry. But Derek is, if nothing else, a very creative businessman. Rodney told the interviewer, a hint of genuine respect breaking through his usual cynicism. He came up with a solution to our dilemma. Up there, Dell had shouted, pointing to a flight path that would lead them back to the reality of Peckham. The news hit the UK faster than a rumor in the Nag's Head. Suddenly, their business associates weren't returning calls. The penthouse was gone. The peacocks were gone. They were cast into a financial wilderness, returning to the only place that would have them, Nelson Mandela House. Chapter 3, The Trial of Friends. The return to Peckham wasn't just about losing money, it was about the fallout. Their friend Mike Fisher, the landlord of the Nag's Head, had invested his life savings into the Trotters' venture. He had remortgaged the pub, betting everything on Del Boy's sure thing. Now, Mike was in prison, awaiting trial for embezzlement, a desperate attempt to recoup the losses. Never was a man more innocent, Del insisted to the interviewer, his voice cracking. The scene shifted Indel's mind to the courthouse corridor. The air was thick with the scent of cheap floor wax and anxiety. Denzel was pacing, his footsteps echoing like a ticking clock. For God's sake, Denzel, sit down. Albert had said, the memory of his voice sharp and clear. You're wearing the marble out. I can't, Albert, can I? Denzel had replied, I've never been a character witness before. I'm worried. I think Dill's made a terrible mistake, having us as witnesses. It's like inviting the Manson family to dinner. Trigger, ever the enigma, had looked up from a crumpled newspaper. I'm going to tell them I hear voices. No, Trig, Rodney had sighed. You're not on trial. You're a character witness. I know, Trigger had said simply, but I hear voices. It had been a disaster. The Trotters lost their homes. Dole's estate with the peacocks became a dream that was auctioned off to pay the interest on the interest. Every day there was more rows, more bad news. Del told Justin, we thought things couldn't possibly get worse. Oh, boy, how wrong we were. Chapter 4, The Empty Chair. The blow that hurt the most wasn't financial. It was the call from Elsie Partridge's son, Uncle Albert, the man who had survived torpedoes, shipwrecks, Andel's cooking, had finally reached his final port. The funeral was a blur of black coats and the biting cold of a London winter. Del felt a profound sense of guilt. They had been off globetrotting while Albert had been in a rest home, his wartime stories falling on the ears of strangers. I feel bad, you know, Del whispered to Rodney as they stood by the hearse, leaving him here on his own while we was all off in Barbados. He wasn't on his own. Del, Rodney tried to comfort him. He had Elsie's family. But the funeral itself turned into a classic Trotter farce. They stood among the mourners, listening to tales of a man named Bunny who was a hero in the RAF. Why did you call him Bunny? Del asked a grieving relative. Well, that's what they called him in the RAF, didn't they? Because his surname was Warren. Del froze. He looked at the coffin. He looked at the headstone. He looked at the mourning family who were definitely not the Warrens he knew. Who, Del whispered, his face turning the color of his beige coat. We're at the wrong funeral. They had spent an hour mourning a complete stranger. It was the kind of moment that would have made Albert roar with laughter, or perhaps start a story about the time he buried a Commodore in the wrong hemisphere during the war. Chapter 5, The Gold Rush. Back in the present, the weight of the inland revenue hung over them like a guillotine. 48,750 for pounds. That was the magic number, plus interest. It was a figure that seemed designed to keep them in the concrete canyons of Peckham forever. So, what are we going to do? Then, Dad, Damien asked, his young face mirroring his father's stubbornness. I suppose you could always look for a job, Raquel suggested gently. Trigger said they're recruiting down at his depot. Road sweeping. The thought of Rodney the man with to GC East bushing a broom was too much for Dell. I'm a trader, ain't I? Dell declared, his eyes catching the light of the flickering television. I've been trading all my life. I could sell rice to the Chinese. He had a plan. He was going to become the manager of a new firm. Since he was disqualified from running a company, he would make Rodney the managing director. Rodney Trotter, Dell beamed, the new face of Trotter's independent traders. You'll be in charge of sales, purchasing, and finance. I'll just be the consultant. But the debt remained. And then the flickering screen provided an answer. Gold Rush, the fastest game show on TV, hosted by Jonathan Ross. I'm going to apply, Dell said. Rodney laughed. Dell, last night one of the questions was who introduced the potato to England. And you said King Edward. I didn't hear the question properly. Dell snapped. But he did it. He got on. The night of the show was a fever dream. The lights were too bright, and Jonathan Ross's suit was even more expensive than Justin's. Dell stood there, representing fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian Renaissance art. He sailed through the first round by pure luck. Kilimanjaro. Yes, because Fuji made cameras. He was moving up the Rainbow Road. Then came the moment, the 50,000 pounds question, the penalty question that could save him or sink him. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Dole's mind went blank. He used his SOS. He called Rodney. Back in the flat, Rodney and Cassandra were dressed as a policewoman and a gladiator, an attempt at fantasy therapy that had gone horribly awry when Dell unexpectedly stayed home. When the phone rang and Jonathan Ross's voice came through, Rodney thought it was Mickey Pierce winding him up. Oh, piss off, Mickey, you're getting on my tits now, Rodney shouted. But it was real. Rodney, help me. Dole's voice pleaded through the speaker the guitar question. Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Rodney, with the confidence of a man who had once heard a record in a library, answered, Ravel. 100% Dell. Ravel. Dell shouted to the nation. Derek, Jonathan Ross said, a look of genuine pity on his face. That was the wrong answer. It was Segovia. Dell's heart didn't just break, it imploded. He had lost. He had lost the money, the flat, and his dignity on national television. Chapter 6, The Phone Call of Destiny. Back at the flat, the mood was funeral quiet. Dell was missing, having disappeared into the night. When he finally returned, he looked older, tired. The vibrant, larger-than-life character seemed to have been hollowed out. I could have sworn it was Ravel, Rodney muttered, looking at his feet. Everyone knows Ravel makes shoes. Dell exploded, though there was no real heat in it. It was a trick question, and you fell for it. They sat in the dim light of the living room, the reality of bankruptcy settling in. They were back at the bottom, but they together. Then the phone rang. Hello, Rodney answered. Yes, can I ask who's calling? He handed the phone to Dell. It's the producer of Gold Rush. Dell took the phone, his face hardening. I bet it's about that podium. I bet someone's damaged it. Probably Jonathan Ross tripped over his own ego. Hello. Yes, this is Derek Trotter. Dell listened. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped. His hand began to shake. And for a moment, Rodney thought he was having another hard turn. What? No, no. He looked at the family, his face transforming from despair to a manic, golden joy. He said there's been a mistake. Dell whispered. It was Ravel. The researcher got it wrong. I've won the 50,000 pounds. The room erupted. Cheers, hugs, the sound of champagne, or at least the promise of it, filled the air. I knew I was right, Dell shouted, his voice regaining its Peckham swagger. Give the money to charity. Pull the other one. It's got bells on. We're the Trotters, and we're back. Chapter 7, The Nag's Head Jubilation. The news of Del Boy's windfall spread through Peckham faster than a cheap suit in a rainstorm. By the time the Trotters arrived at the Nag's Head, the pub was already buzzing. Sid, the stand-in landlord while Mike was away, had already lined up a row of glasses. Trigger was there, looking at a pint as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Boyke and Marlene were in their usual corner, Boyke looking particularly smug as he adjusted his silk tie. I hear you've come into a bit of official money, Dell, Boyke drawled, his laugh sounding like a machine gun in a library. 50 grand. Hardly enough for a decent cigar, but for you, it must feel like the crown jewels. Jealousy is a terrible thing, Boyke, Dell shot back, slamming a stack of notes onto the bar. A round for everyone, Sid, and make it the good stuff. None of that house vinegar. Nice one, Del Boy, Trigger said, nodding slowly. I knew you'd win. I had a feeling in my water. You always have a feeling in your water, Trig, Rodney sighed, leaning against the bar. Usually it's just the plumbing. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed and the stories grew taller. Denzel talked about the trial, Denzel still shaking his head at the memory of Trigger's testimony. But beneath the laughter, there was a sense of relief. The Trotters weren't just back in the money, they were back in their element. I'm telling you, Rotters, Dell whispered, his arm around his brother's shoulder. This is just the start. 50 grand. That's seed money. We're going to turn this into 500. Millionaires by Christmas, I promise you. Rodney looked at his brother, seeing the old spark back in his eyes. He knew it was unlikely. He knew they'd probably lose it all on a shipment of one-legged trousers or glow-in-the-dark Bibles. But for tonight, he didn't care. Yeah, Dell, Rodney smiled. Millionaires by Christmas. Chapter 8, The Morning After. The sun rose over Nelson Mandela House, casting a long shadow across the parking lot where the yellow van sat, a silent witness to their roller coaster life. Inside the flat, the air was heavy with the scent of stale celebration and burnt toast. Dell sat at the small kitchen table, a mountain of paperwork spread out before him. The Inland Revenue, the Customs and Excise, the various business associates who had suddenly rediscovered his phone number. What are you doing, Dell? Raquel asked, coming in and placing a hand on his shoulder. Just planning, sweetheart, Dell said, his voice quiet. This 50 grand. It's a lifeline. But we have to be smart. No more sure things. No more Central American markets. You mean it? Raquel asked, her voice full of hope. Dell looked up at her, and for a second, the mask of the salesman slipped. I have to mean it, Raquel. For you. For Damien. For the memory of the old man. He looked at the empty chair where Uncle Albert used to sit, telling tales of the war and the sea. He could almost hear the old man's voice, warning him about the sharks in the city. We're going back to basics, Dell declared, his voice regaining its strength. Trotters independent traders, buying and selling, finding the gaps, being the bestest. Rodney walked in, looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge backward. Are we still millionaires, Dell? In spirit, Rotters, Dell grinned, tossing him a set of keys. Now, get the van started. I've heard a rumor about a shipment of slightly used digital watches in Sidcup. We've got work to do. As the Reliant Regal roared, or rather, coughed to life in the parking lot below, Del Boy stood on the balcony, looking out over his kingdom. The seasons had changed, the tides had turned, and the Trotters were still standing. Kushti, he whispered to the London wind. Chapter 9, The Sidcup Hustle. The drive to Sidcup was an ordeal that only the brave, or the desperate, would undertake in a three-wheeled van with a heater that emitted nothing but the faint scent of burning damp. Rodney hunched in the passenger seat, his knees pressed against the dashboard. I don't like this, Del, Rodney complained, pulling his scarf tighter. Sidcup, it's practically in the countryside. And these digital watches, who's the contact? Dell wrestled with the steering wheel as the van hit a pothole. It's a bloke named Nifty Neville. A diamond, Rodney. He's got a warehouse full of them. Latest tech, water resistant up to 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters? Dell, that's a light drizzle. Exactly. Perfect for the British climate, Dell replied, beaming. And get this, they're solar powered. No more batteries. You just show them to the sun, and bingo, you know what time it is. They arrived at a desolate industrial estate that looked like a set for a post-apocalyptic film. Nifty Neville was waiting, leaning against a rusted shutter. He handed Dell a cardboard box. Dell opened it to reveal a sea of plastic watches, each one flashing 12 o'clock with desperate urgency. Look at that, Rodders. Pure class, Dell admired, strapping one onto his wrist. He held his arm out of the van window, waiting for the weak London sun to work its magic. Nothing happened. It's a bit shy. That's all, Dell muttered, shaking his arm vigorously. It needs a bit of oomph. Give it a rub, Rodney. Chapter 10. Solar Power in a London Fog. Market day at Peckham was a symphony of chaos. Dell stood on his favorite pitch, the cardboard box of solar watches front and center. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Dell's voice boomed over the crowd. Don't look at the price. Look at the quality. Are you tired of batteries dying? Are you sick of losing time when the lights go out? Well, worry no more. The Trotter Solar Watch is here. A small crowd gathered, drawn in by the sheer audacity of his delivery. Is it waterproof? A woman asked, pointing at the plastic casing. Is it waterproof? Dell laughed, a sound of pure mock indignation. Darling, this watch was designed for the French Navy. You could dive to the bottom of the Thames, and it would still tell you it's time for a cup of tea. Just then, a dark cloud moved over the market, and a thick, gray fog began to roll in. One by one, the displays on the watches began to fade. The flashing 12 o'clock became a dim memory, then vanished entirely. Oi, my watch has gone blank, a man shouted, holding up his wrist. Dell didn't blink. That, sir, is the echo sleep feature. It's saving power. It knows you're not looking at it, so it's having a little nap. Pure genius in it. Rodney, standing at the back of the pitch, put his head in his hands. Dell, the fog is getting thicker. We're selling invisible time. Nonsense, Rodney. It's an atmospheric horological experience, Dell whispered back, before turning to the crowd with a wide grin. Who wants another? Buy two, and I'll throw in a set of glow-in-the-dark shoelaces. Chapter 11, The Echoes of the Empire. Back at the Nag's Head that evening, the Sidcup sting was the talk of the bar. Dell sat with a large cognac, a pile of unsold solar watches in a bag at his feet. So, Dell, Boyke said, leaning over with a smirk that could curdle milk, I hear you've been selling watches that only work in the Sahara. Very forward-thinking of you. I suppose your next venture will be selling ice cubes to the Eskimos? It's about the future, Boyke, Dell retorted, not missing a beat. Renewable energy, green technology. I'm an environmentalist now. I'm Del Green Trotter. Trigger nodded solemnly from his stool. I like the watches. Del, I bought one. It told me it was midnight all afternoon. Very peaceful. Rodney sighed, sipping his pint. We made 20 quid, Del, and half of that was from selling the shoelaces to a blind man. Raquel arrived, sitting down next to Del. She looked at the bag of watches and then at Del's hopeful face. At least you're trying, Del. That's what matters. Exactly, sweetheart, Del said, squeezing her hand. We're back on the streets, the pulse of the city. We're traders, Rodney. We don't need millions to be happy. We just need a good pitch and a bit of luck. Rodney looked around the pub at the familiar faces, the peeling wallpaper, and the warm, noisy atmosphere. He realized that despite everything, he wouldn't trade this for a boardroom in Central America. I suppose you're right, Del, Rodney admitted. But if you bring home a shipment of solar-powered umbrellas, I'm leaving. Chapter 12, Bonjour, Peckham. The night was quiet as Del stood on the balcony of Nelson Mandela House. The lights of London stretched out before him, a tapestry of possibilities and its pitfalls. He thought about the Harrison watch, the helicopters, and the crash. It felt like a lifetime ago. He looked at the yellow van in the parking lot below. It looked small and battered, but it was still there. It had survived the million-pound dream and the bankruptcy nightmare. It was a trotter through and through. You okay, Del? Raquel asked, joining him. Yeah, Del breathed, the familiar scent of the city filling his lungs. I was just thinking, we've been through a lot, haven't we? But we're still here, still fighting, still trading. And we've got each other, she reminded him. And 50 grand in the bank, Del added, the old twinkle returning to his eyes. Well, 49,980 after today's expenses. He looked up at the stars, which were finally visible as the fog cleared. You know, Rodders is a good lad, Del mused. He's got his GCEs, his ideas, but he needs me. He needs the old Del Boy touch. He leaned over the railing, shouting into the darkness. Hear that? London, the Trotters are back. And this time next year. Well, you know the rest. Raquel laughed and pulled him back inside. As the door closed, the faint sound of a distant police siren echoed through the streets, a reminder that in Peckham, the hustle never truly ends. Bonjour, Peckham, Del whispered as he turned off the light. Bonjour. Chapter 13, The Executive Suit. The following Monday, Rodney arrived at the flat wearing a suit that was so sharp it could have been used to carve a Sunday roast. It was a charcoal gray number, impeccably tailored or, At least it looked that way until he tried to sit down and the seams let out a high-pitched scream of protest. "You look like a proper businessman, Rodney," Dell remarked, stirring a cup of tea with a gold-plated spoon, a bit like a younger, slightly more gaunt version of Richard Branson, minus the island, and the airlines, and the charisma. "I'm taking my role seriously, Dell," Rodney insisted, checking his reflection in a toaster. "Cassandra says if I'm the managing director, I should project an image of authority. We're having an executive lunch today." "An executive lunch? Sounds posh," Dell said, his interest piqued. "Where are we going? The Ritz, Savoy, Bernie's Cafe?" "We're going to that new place, Le Petit Gourmet," Rodney said proudly. "It's very exclusive. You have to book a table 3 weeks in advance." 3 weeks? I could have grown my own potatoes in that time, Dell scoffed. "But go on, then. I'll come as your consultant. I've got some consulting to do anyway. I need to see a man about a consignment of, well, let's just say it's an atmospheric opportunity." The lunch was a disaster of epic proportions. The portions were so small that Dell spent 10 minutes looking for his steak with a magnifying glass. When the bill arrived, it was more than Rodney's weekly salary. 25 quid for a sprig of parsley and a piece of meat the size of a postage stamp, Dell whispered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "I've seen more substance in a political manifesto." "It's about the experience, Dell," Rodney hissed back. "Experience? The only experience I'm having is the experience of starvation," Dell retorted. He leaned over to a nearby table where a wealthy-looking couple were dining. "Excuse me, sir, are you finished with that bread roll? Only my managing director here has a very sensitive appetite." Chapter 14, The Bargain from Brussels. A few days later, Dell returned to the flat looking like he'd just won the lottery. He was carrying a small, metallic briefcase that looked remarkably like the ones used by nuclear scientists in 1960s spy films. "Gather round, everyone," Dell announced, placing the briefcase on the kitchen table. "Rodney, Raquel, Cassandra, if you're finished with your executive bookkeeping, take a look at this." He flipped the latches and opened the case. Inside were dozens of small, silver canisters that looked like miniature fire extinguishers. "What are they, Dell?" Raquel asked, peering into the box. "Hairspray, deodorant, anti-tank missiles." "Better," Dell beamed. "This, my dear family, is alpine oxygen. Fresh air, straight from the peaks of the Swiss Alps, compressed, purified, and ready to revitalize the weary lungs of the London workforce." Rodney stared at the canisters. "Dell, you've bought a box of air?" "Not just air, Rodney. Alpine air. It's the latest craze in Brussels. All the top executives are using it to stay sharp. One puff of this and you're ready to take on the world. I've got 2,000 canisters arriving tomorrow." How much did they cost? Cassandra asked, her eyebrows reaching for her hairline. A bargain. $5 grand for the lot. We sell them at £5 a puff, a canister, and we're looking at a 10,000-pound profit. Tax-free, naturally. Dell, the air in London is free, Rodney pointed out. Dirty, yes, but free. Free but filthy. Rodney, this is pure. It's trotter fresh. I've already got a marketing slogan. Don't just breathe, peak performance. Chapter 15, The Charity Gala and the Smog. The timing of the Alpine oxygen launch couldn't have been more perfect. A thick, yellow smog had descended upon London, turning the city into something resembling a giant bowl of pea soup. People were coughing, spluttering, and generally desperate for a breath of something that didn't taste like coal dust. This is it. Routers, Dell shouted, loading the van. The market will be screaming for this. We're going to be heroes, like the Red Cross, but with better jewelry. They set up their pitch in the heart of Peckham. Dell was wearing a white lab coat he'd borrowed from a local dentist, and Rodney was standing by with a megaphone. Feeling sluggish, lungs feeling like a chimney sweep's waistcoat, Dell shouted, "Get your trotter fresh Alpine oxygen. One puff and you'll think you're skiing in St. Moritz." A crowd gathered instantly. People were clamoring for the canisters, waving 5-pound notes in the air. For 2 hours, it was a frenzy. Dell was sweating, his lab coat stained with fog, but he was grinning like a Cheshire cat. "I told you, Rodney, vision, that's what I've got." But then the first complaint arrived. A man who had just bought 5 canisters came back, looking less than revitalized. "Oi, this canister is empty," he shouted. "Empty? Impossible," Dell said, taking the canister. He pressed the nozzle. A faint, wheezing sound emerged, followed by a smell that was definitely not reminiscent of the Swiss Alps. In fact, it smelled remarkably like Brussels sprouts. Rodney whispered, sniffing the air. "Brussels sprouts." The man roared, "I'm breathing in a Sunday dinner." Chapter 16, The Reality of Fresh Air. It turned out that Nifty Neville's Brussels contact had been slightly less than honest. The canisters weren't filled with Alpine air. They were a surplus batch of industrial-grade gas used in a Belgian vegetable packing plant. The crowd quickly turned from desperate customers to an angry mob. Dell and Rodney barely made it to the van before the first tomato hit the windshield. "Start the engine, Rodney, start the engine," Dell screamed. The reliant Regal coughed, spluttered, and then roared to life, screeching away from the market just as a hail of empty canisters rained down around them. Back at the flat, the silence was deafening. Raquel and Cassandra were waiting, their arms crossed. So, Raquel said softly, "How did the peak performance go?" Dell sat down at the table, his lab coat torn and his pride even more so. "Well, we had a bit of a technical glitch. The Belgian atmosphere is a bit more robust than I anticipated. You lost 5,000 pounds, Del, Cassandra said, her voice like ice. No, not lost. Invested in a lesson, Del corrected weakly. And besides, we've still got the canisters. They're very durable. We could use them as door stops. Rodney looked at his brother, and for a moment, he felt a surge of anger. But then he saw the exhaustion in Del's eyes, the way his shoulders slumped. He realized that Del was just trying to get them back to where they were, to the glory days of the Harrison watch. It's okay, Del, Rodney said, sitting down next to him. We've still got the 44,000 from the game show. We're not broke. Del looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. You're right, Rotters. You're right. And I've heard a rumor about a shipment of slightly damaged electric toothbrushes in Gravesend. They're sonic, apparently. Very modern. Raquel sighed and walked over to the kitchen. I'll make some tea. And Del. Yes, sweetheart. No more air from anywhere. Promise, Del said, crossing his heart with a gold-ringed finger. He winked at Rodney. But toothbrushes, Rotters. Everyone's got teeth, haven't they? It's a guaranteed winner. As the kettle began to whistle, the Trotters sat together in the heart of Peckham, a family built on dreams, disasters, and an unbreakable bond that no amount of Belgian sprout gas could ever truly tarnish. Chapter 17, The Gravesend Gamble. The trip to Gravesend was conducted in a silence that was only broken by the rhythmic thwack-thwack of a loose wiper blade against the windshield. Del was focused, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if he were piloting a fighter jet through enemy territory. Rodney, on the other hand, was reading a pamphlet about business ethics and social responsibility, looking like a man about to go to his own execution. These toothbrushes, Del, Rodney said, not looking up. Nifty Neville said they were slightly damaged. What does that mean in nifty terms? Does it mean they don't have bristles? Or do they just explode when you plug them in? Don't be so cynical, Rodney. It's cosmetic damage, Del explained, weaving through traffic. A few scratches on the box, maybe a slightly wonky logo. But inside, pure sonic technology, 20,000 vibrations per second. It's like having a miniature jackhammer in your mouth, but, gentle. They reached a warehouse that looked even more derelict than the one in Sidcup. A man named Shifty Arthur, a close associate of Nifty Neville, was waiting. He gestured toward a mountain of crates. There they are, Del, the Ultrasonic 3000, experimental model. Straight from the lab in Japan, Arthur lied, his eyes darting toward the exit. Del opened a box. The toothbrushes looked impressive sleek, silver, and heavy. He pressed the on button. A low-pitched hum filled the air, and for a moment, every loose piece of metal in the warehouse began to vibrate in sympathy. Hear that, Rotters? Power, Dell shouted over the hum. I'll take the lot. Chapter 18, The Sonic Boom. The following Saturday, the Trotters set up their pitch in Peckham once again. This time, Dell was wearing a silk bathrobe over his clothes, looking like a man who had just stepped out of a luxury bathroom. Do you want teeth so white they'll blind a bus driver? Dell's voice echoed through the market. Do you want a smile that says I'm a millionaire even if I live in a flat? Then you need the Ultrasonic 3000. A crowd gathered, intrigued by the silk bathrobe. Rodney stood by with a bowl of water and some stained dentures he'd acquired from somewhere. Watch this, ladies and gentlemen, Dell announced. He dipped a toothbrush into the water and pressed the button. The hum was much louder than before. In fact, it was so loud that a car alarm across the street went off. The water in the bowl turned into a fine mist instantly. The dentures didn't just get clean, they began to rattle so violently that one of the front teeth flew out and hit a passing policeman in the helmet. Oi, the policeman shouted, looking around. It's just the deep clean mode, Dell whispered urgently to the crowd. It's finding the stubborn stains. Who wants one? 5 quid. A fraction of the retail price. But then, something strange began to happen. A pack of local dogs, led by a particularly large Doberman, began to howl in unison. They raced toward the pitch, their ears flat against their heads, looking like they were responding to a silent call from a distant planet. Dell, I think the frequency is a bit high, Rodney said, backed against the van as 5 dogs began to circle them. Nonsense. Dogs love hygiene, Dell shouted, but even he looked worried as the Doberman began to gnaw on the leg of the display table. Chapter 19, The CEO's Dilemma. Back at the flat, the living room was filled with the low-pitched hum of several dozen ultrasonic 3000s that Dell was testing. Raquel and Cassandra were in the kitchen, their heads buried in their hands. Rodney, Cassandra said, her voice trembling with frustration. As the managing director, can you please tell your consultant to turn off the miniature jet engines? My teeth are literally vibrating in my head. Rodney walked into the living room. Dell, turn them off. The neighbors are complaining that their television signals are scrambled, and every cat in the building is currently hiding under a sofa. Dell switched them off, and the silence that followed was heavy. Rodney, you've got to see the bigger picture. We've sold 50 of them. Sure, we've had a few returns from people whose fillings fell out, but the profit margin is huge. Dell, we can't sell these, Rodney said firmly, his CEO persona finally taking charge. They're dangerous. They attract animals and scramble electronics. It's a health and safety nightmare. Dell sat down on the sofa, looking at the silver toothbrushes. I just wanted a winner, Rotters. Something that would make up for the air canisters. Something professional. Professionalism isn't about the product, Dell, Rodney said, his voice softening. it's about? Well, it's about not being a menace to society. I suppose so. Dell sighed. He looked up at Rodney. So, what do we do with 2,000 sonic toothbrushes? Rodney thought for a moment. I heard a rumor that the local council is looking for a way to scare away the pigeons from the town hall. If we mount these on the roof. Dill's eyes lit up. Rodney, you're a genius. A sonic pigeon deterrent. We sell them to the council at 20 quid a unit. We'll make a fortune. Chapter 20, The Trotter Way. The contract with the council was signed within a week. The ultrasonic 3000s were installed on the roof of the Peckham Town Hall. And for the first time in 50 years, not a single pigeon dared to land within 100 yards of the building. Dell and Rodney stood on the pavement across the street, watching as a confused bird hovered in midair before screeching and flying toward Brixton. Look at that, Rodders. Innovation, Dell beamed, pocketing a check from the council. We've done a public service and made a tidy profit. That's the Trotter way. Yeah, Rodney admitted, a small smile appearing on his face. I guess it worked out. They walked back toward the Nag's Head, the familiar sounds of the city surrounding them. They weren't millionaires, and they weren't in Barbados. They were in Peckham, with a bankrupt business, a yellow van, and a family that drove them crazy. But as Dell pushed open the pub door and waved a greeting to Trigger and Boyke, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. You know, Rodders, Dell said, leaning against the bar. I've heard a rumor about a shipment of slightly used solar-powered calculators in Dartford. They're smart, apparently. They can predict the weather. Rodney groaned and took a deep sip of his pint. Here we go again. No, really, think about it. Everyone's got numbers, haven't they? It's a guaranteed winner. As the sun set over Peckham, casting long shadows across the concrete towers, the Trotters were still dreaming, still trading, and still against all odds together. Kushti, Dell whispered, raising his glass. Kushti. Chapter 21, The Dartford Dash. The trip to Dartford was arguably the most terrifying 60 minutes of Rodney's life. The Reliance engine was making a sound that suggested a disgruntled goblin lived under the hood, and Dell was driving with the reckless abandon of a man who believed speed limits were merely suggestions for the unimaginative. These calculators, Dell, Rodney shouted over the wind whizzing through a gap in the door. Predicting the weather is mathematically impossible. A calculator is for long division, not for telling you if you need a brolly. It's about the sensor, Rodders. It's got a barometric quartz processor, Dell replied, narrowly missing a milk float. You punch in your postcode, hit the equals sign, and bingo, it gives you a percentage chance of precipitation. It's the future of agriculture. Son, every farmer from here to Norfolk will be screaming for him. They met the supplier, a man known only as Stuttering Stan, in a car park behind a derelict cinema. Stan produced a box of devices that looked like regular calculators, but had a peculiar, tiny antenna sticking out the side. SSS solar power, Dell, Stan stammered, tapping the tiny panels. And the WWW weather logic, PPP pure genius. Dell didn't even haggle. He handed over a chunk of the council's pigeon money and loaded the boxes. As they drove away, Rodney noticed the antennas were actually just painted toothpicks glued to the side. Dell, these aren't sensors, Rodney whispered, pulling one off easily. Of course they are. They're biodegradable receivers. Dell snapped. Now hush up. I'm mentally calculating our markup. We're going to be the Michael Fishes of the digital age. Chapter 22, The Prophecy of the Postcode. Back at the flat, Dell had set up a meteorological testing station on the kitchen table. He was surrounded by maps, postcode directories, and half a dozen smart calculators. Right, let's test Peckham, Dell announced. He punched in SE15 and hit the equals sign. The screen flickered and displayed 70 to 0.5%. 72% what? Dell, Raquel asked, peering over his shoulder. Sun, darling, 72% sun. Dell beamed. He looked out the window. It was currently pouring with rain, a steady, gray London drizzle that looked like it had no intention of stopping until 2030. The calculator says sun, Dell, Rodney pointed out, gesturing to the deluge outside. It's a proactive forecast, Rodney. It's predicting the sun for tomorrow. It's thinking ahead. It's got a bigger brain than you, that's for sure. But as the night wore on, every postcode Dell punched in resulted in exactly the same number, 70 to 0.5%. Whether it was the North Pole, the Sahara Desert, or the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the smart calculator remained stubbornly optimistic. It stuck. Dell, Rodney sighed. It's not a weather sensor. It's just a calculator with one broken button that always displays 70 to 0.5. Dell stared at the screen, his face a mask of stubborn denial. Maybe the world is just becoming very consistent. Rodney, have you thought of that? Maybe it's global stabilization. Chapter 23, The Peckham Heatwave. The next morning, Dell was at the market pitch, wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and a Hawaiian shirt that looked like it had been designed by someone in the middle of a high fever hallucination. Don't get caught in the rain. Don't get burnt in the sun. Dell's voice rang out. Know the future before it happens with the Trotter Weather Whiz, as used by the Himalayan Sherpas. A small crowd, damp from the morning rain, gathered round. How does it work then, mate? A burly man asked. Simple, sir. Punch in your location, hit equals, and it tells you the atmospheric destiny. Dell handed him a calculator. The man punched in his number. The screen flashed, 70 to 0.5%. What's that mean? That, sir, means a 70 to 0.5% chance of a glorious heat wave. Dell lied, not missing a beat. Just as the words left his mouth, a sudden, violent crack of thunder echoed through the market, and the sky turned a bruised, angry purple. The crowd looked at the sky, then at the calculator, then at Dell. Heat wave, A, the man said as the first hailstones began to bounce off the display. It's a localized pressure inversion, Dell shouted, scrambling to cover the boxes with a tarpaulin. The calculator is sensing the heat behind the clouds. It's very sensitive. But the crowd had had enough. Within minutes, the pitch was deserted, save for Dell and Rodney, who were shivering under the tarp as the hailstones began to turn into a torrential downpour. 70 to 0.5%, Dell, Rodney muttered, his teeth chattering. I think that's the percentage chance of us being complete idiots. Chapter 24, Millionaires in Mind. That evening, the Nag's Head was a sanctuary of warmth and low-level grumbling. The Trotters sat in their usual spot, nursing a round of drinks that had been bought with the very last of the weather money. So, Dell, Boyke said, sauntering over with a self-satisfied smirk, I hear you've been trying to predict the weather. Very brave. I suppose next week you'll be selling crystal balls to the blind? It's about the spirit of discovery, Boyke, Dell replied, his voice regaining some of its usual steel. We're pioneers. We take risks. While you're sitting there counting your pennies, we're out there on the cutting edge. Trigger nodded from the bar. I like the calculator. Dell, I used it to figure out my bus fare. It said it was 70 to 0.5 pence. The driver wasn't happy, but I felt very scientific. Rodney looked at his brother. Dell was down, but he wasn't out. He was already looking at a discarded newspaper, his eyes scanning the classifieds for the next golden opportunity. You okay, Dell? Rodney asked. Dell looked up, and for a moment, the old, familiar twinkle returned, the one that had sustained them through 1,000 failures and a handful of glorious successes. Yeah, rotters, I'm fine, Dell said, leaning in close, because I've just seen an advert. A warehouse in Essex, 2,000 pairs of self-walking trainers. They've got tiny motors in the heels. You just stand in them and they do the work for you. Rodney groaned, but he couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. Here we go again, Rodney whispered. No, really, think about it. Everyone's got feet, haven't they? It's a guaranteed winner. This time next year, Rodney. We'll be millionaires. Rodney finished for him. And as the lights of Peckham flickered in the rain outside, the Trotters sat together bankrupt in the eyes of the law, but richer than kings in the currency of hope, family, and the eternal, beautiful hustle. Kushti, Dell whispered, raising his glass to the empty air where a million-pound dream still hovered, waiting to be caught. Kushti. Chapter 25. The Essex Expedition. The journey to Essex was a symphony of rattles and bangs. The supervan was carrying a spare tire in the back that wasn't actually attached to anything, and every time Dell took a corner, it sounded like a giant was playing marbles in the trunk. Self-walking trainers, Dell, think about the logistics. Rodney sighed, clutching the dashboard. A human being isn't a puppet. We move our feet because our brains tell us to. If a motor in a heel starts pushing your foot before your brain is ready, you're going to end up doing a faceplant in the high street. You've got no vision. Rodney, that's your problem. You're stuck in the dark ages of manual locomotion, Dell shouted back, swerving to avoid a pheasant. This is for the elderly, for the lazy, for the tired executive who's had a long day at the Petit Gourmet. It's about effortless mobility. They arrived at the warehouse in Essex, a corrugated iron shed that smelled strongly of stagnant water and knockoff perfume. A man known as Ledge Lenny, because he supposedly spent half his time on one, dodging the law, stepped out. He was wearing a tracksuit that looked like it was made of discarded aluminum foil. Here they are, Dell, the Trotter Trek 5000, Italian design, Japanese engineering, Peckham prices. Lenny grinned, showing a set of teeth that were more gap than enamel. Dell picked up a trainer. It was heavy, suspiciously heavy, and had a small red button on the side of the sole. Is it quiet? Lenny, I don't want people sounding like a lawnmower when they're walking to the shops. Whisper quiet. Dell, like a cat on a carpet. Lenny lied, pocketing those cash before the first box was even on the van. Chapter 26, The Runaway Rodney. Back at Nelson Mandela House, the testing phase began. Dell insisted that Rodney be the first pilot of the Trotter Trek 5000. I'm not doing it, Dell. Rodney flatly refused. Rodney, as managing director, you have a duty to ensure the quality of our inventory. Now put the shoes on. Reluctantly, Rodney laced up the trainers. They felt like bricks strapped to his feet. Dell stood back, his hand on a clipboard. Right, engage primary locomotion. Hit the button. Rodders. Rodney pressed the red button on his left heel. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sound like a distant jet engine began to emanate from the floor. Rodney's left leg suddenly shot forward with the force of a hydraulic ram. Ho! Dell, turn it off! Rodney screamed as his left leg began to march toward the kitchen at 60 steps per minute, while his right leg remained firmly rooted in the living room. It's cincing up. Hit the right one, Dell shouted. Rodney frantically hit the right button. Now both legs were moving. He wasn't walking. He was being marched by his own footwear. He smashed into the kitchen table, careened off the fridge, and headed straight for the balcony door at an alarming speed. They've got no brakes. Dell, the trainers are in charge. Rodney yelled as he disappeared into the hallway, his legs moving in a blur of silver and blue nylon. It's a high-intensity workout feature Dell called out, chasing after him. It's for the fitness market. The chase ended only when Rodney tripped over the hallway rug, causing the trainers to continue walking while he lay on his face. The shoes dragged him across the linoleum until they finally hit a wall and the motors burned out with a puff of acrid blue smoke. Chapter 27, The Market Meltdown. Despite the technical hitch, Dell was convinced he could sell them. He spent the evening adjusting the motors with a screwdriver and a prayer. It was just the calibration. Rodney, Dell explained the next morning at the pitch. I've set them to stroll mode. They're as gentle as a summer breeze now. The pitch was set up. A large sign read, Never Walk Again. The Revolutionary Trotter Trek 5000. A small crowd gathered, mostly pensioners curious about the promise of never walking again. Dell saw his opportunity. He singled out a frail-looking man named Arthur. Arthur, my old son, you look like you've had a long day. Try these on. For free. No obligation. Arthur sat on a stool and laced up the trainers. Dell leaned in, his voice a whisper. Just a little tap on the button, Arthur, and let the magic happen. Dell pressed the button himself. The motors didn't hum this time. They screamed. Arthur's legs didn't walk. They began to vibrate at a frequency that made his dentures rattle. Before Dell could react, the trainers took off. Arthur didn't walk out of the market. He glided out at 15 miles per hour, his arms flailing as he narrowly missed a fruit stall. He's a natural, Dell shouted to the horrified onlookers. Look at that posture. Look at that speed. Dell, he's headed for the canal. Rodney yelled. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Arthur, powered by the Trotter Trek 5000, disappeared around a corner, the sound of the motors echoing like a swarm of angry bees. Chapter 28, The Final Toast. The nag's head was unusually quiet that night. Arthur had been rescued from a hedge by the local fire brigade, and the Trotters had been banned from the market for endangering the elderly with motorized apparel. Dell sat with a cognac, looking at the ceiling. The 50,000 was mostly gone spent on alpine air, sonic toothbrushes, weather calculators, and now a warehouse full of runaway trainers. Well, Rodney said, breaking the silence. That's it then. We're officially back to square one. Actually, we're behind square one. Square zero. Dell didn't look discouraged. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object. What's that, Dell? Raquel asked, joining them at the table. It's a micro-generator for umbrellas, Dell said, his eyes beginning to sparkle again. It uses the kinetic energy of the raindrops to power a small heater in the handle. Keeps your hands warm while you're getting wet. I'm meeting a bloke in Shoreditch tomorrow. He's got 5,000 of them, straight from the Swedish patent office. Rodney stared at his brother. He looked at the peeling wallpaper of the pub, at Trigger nodding off in the corner, and at the yellow van parked in the rain outside. He realized that this was their life. It was a cycle of glorious, ridiculous failures fueled by a stubborn, beautiful hope. Heated umbrellas, Del? Rodney asked. Guaranteed winner, Rodders. Del grinned, raising his glass. Everyone hates cold hands. It's a gold mine. This time next year. Rodney sighed, picked up his pint, and clinked it against Del's glass. This time next year, Del, Rodney whispered. As the rain lashed against the windows of the Nag's Head, the trotters sat together, undeterred by the logic of the world. Because in the heart of Peckham, as long as there was a deal to be made and a brother to blame, the dream would never die. Kushti, Del whispered, Kushti. Chapter 29, The Swedish Sizzler. The meeting in Shoreditch took place in a bar that was so trendy it didn't even have a sign on the door. Just a single, unlit light bulb hanging over a rusted iron gate. Del walked in with his coat collar turned up, looking like a high-stakes gambler, while Rodney followed, looking like he was checking for emergency exits. The contact was a man named Sven, though his accent was pure Bermondsey, who sat hunched over a collection of umbrellas that looked remarkably standard until you saw the small, digital display on the handle. The Swedish Sizzler, Del, Sven whispered, stroking a polyester canopy. Internal heating elements. Kinetic charging. You shake it, it heats. It's for the man who has everything but wants to stay dry and cozy. Del inspected the handle. It felt heavy enough to suggest a car battery was hidden inside. And it's safe. No chance of, well, you know, a hot grip situation. Safe as houses. Del, tested in the fjords, Sven promised. Del didn't hesitate. He traded the last of their remaining cash for the entire consignment. As they loaded the boxes into the Reliant,